The ESTOCIN, a Navy-guided missile frigate, is just one of those assets. When it leaves port in Cartagena, Colombia, it has a 7-man Coast Guard LEDET team on board.
What do you want to do about the 49?
The law enforcement detachment becomes the Coast Guard department on board. They stand watches in the Combat Information Center, so when elements come up with contacts that we're approaching, it's actually the Coast Guard on-watch personnel that do the bridge-to-bridge queries of those people initially. They're always operationally knowledgeable of what's going on.
Its current course will take the ESTOCIN to Panama. En route, the crew will use all the Navy vessel's capabilities to monitor ship activity in the area.
CIC is the Combat Information Center. People refer to it as kind of the brains of the ship. The bridge where you drive the ship is the eyes and what goes on, but the Combat Information Center is where you gather all the information. That's why we have access to radar pictures in here, both air radar and surface radar. We have access to sonar information, and so we get all the information from all the sources. And then usually there'll be an officer standing watch in here called a Tactical Action Officer or TAO. And his job is to pull all that information together and be able to sort through it and decide, what's the course of action? What do I need to do? How do we respond to this particular input?
So we're not only out here looking for the ships, we're looking for air targets of interest. They use the aircraft to deliver their drugs to the United States. So we have our SPS-49, our air search radar, it's a 2D air search, two-dimensional air search radar. It gives us a bearing and range to the contact.
To supplement the ship's electronics, the Coast Guard will also put the Navy's helicopters to work, flying reconnaissance missions from the ship several times a day. The helicopter is equipped with various types of sensors as well, including surface search radar, electronic surveillance measurement gear, or ESM, and sonar, that allow the crews to detect objects in the water.
Well, I think the helicopter is a huge addition to the ship because we can extend their range so much. We can move out 100 miles away from the ship with equivalent sensors to what they have on board, and basically that means our radius of coverage is almost 100 square miles in any direction. And we have the ability to relay back the information that we can see real time to them, and they can run background checks on the ships, things that we're not going to have available to us that far out. And they also have the ability to task us to specific contacts of interest, whereas they would just have to be guessing if they're looking at a blip on the radar screen. They can kind of put a face to the name if we're out there on top.
There are several profiles of boats that catch the attention of the LEDET team. The northbound coastal freighter is the most common, often specifically outfitted to transport huge amounts of contraband. Freighters are easy to spot and move so slowly they can't really evade law enforcement efforts.
Yes. V-I-V-I-E-T-T-E.
Back in the early 1980s, when drug smuggling on ships first began, you would have huge ships, 500-foot ships out there with bales of marijuana just stacked on deck as they steamed in open view of anybody who cared to overfly them or see them coming. As the Coast Guard began to take law enforcement action against these vessels and stop that, then they started putting the loads below decks, out of sight.
Making use of containers is another option for smugglers. Hiding their contraband amidst other cargo makes it more difficult to find.
Holy. We got it, buddy. Crack it open. Where's the knife at?
Smuggling techniques have become increasingly sophisticated, but with each step, the Coast Guard and allied agencies have adjusted. Smugglers would design secret compartments into smaller boats. The Coast Guard response was to refine their space accountability procedures. Airdrops were next. Small planes flying from a point in Latin America would drop bales of marijuana off the U.S. coast. Then a boat would run out and pick up the shipment. In response, the Coast Guard stepped up the air war. Each offensive strategy was met with a new defensive tactic.
It's actually a cat and mouse game.
I mean, as they get better at hiding it, we get better at finding it, and then they get better and we get better.
The next step was for smugglers to transport an entirely different cargo.
Cocaine is much smaller than marijuana, much more valuable, and you're able to secret the cocaine in different compartments.
This hull here that you see is the original hull of this sailboat. This was all aftermarket, put on there strictly for the purpose of smuggling cocaine into the country.
Not only can large amounts of cocaine be hidden on smaller vessels, but concealment efforts have also become much more daring.